All right, so get ready, because today we are diving deep into the life of Angela Davis.
Oh, yeah, she's been called a revolutionary, an icon, even the most dangerous woman in America.
But was she really a visionary fighting for social justice, or was there something more to it? Like, was it all an act?
Well, I think that's what we're really trying to figure out today, right?
Hmm.
Grifter or gifted? It's a fascinating question,
It really is.
especially because her story unfolds during a very tumultuous period in American history,
Yeah.
like the late 60s and 70s.
It's almost like a mirror to all those anxieties about race and justice and political ideology at the time.
Exactly.
So to get a clear picture, we've gathered a whole stack of sources for this deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
We have her autobiography, encyclopedia entries, articles from across several decades, even some vintage New York Times pieces.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
We're going to try.
We're going to trace her journey from her childhood all the way through her ongoing work today.
Yeah, we'll unpack the controversies, weigh the praise against the criticisms, and hopefully give you enough information to decide for yourself.
Exactly.
Grifter or gifted?
Listen.
Sounds good to me. So let's rewind all the way back to the beginning. Angela Davis was born in 1944 in Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, yeah.
And not just any neighborhood. She grew up in a place called Dynamite Hill.
And that nickname is, sadly, quite literal.
Ooh.
White supremacists were targeting black families moving into the area.
Whoa.
With a series of bombings, some families even had to arm themselves and take turns guarding their homes at night.
Can you imagine growing up in that kind of environment?
It's hard to even fathom, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And we know she also attended segregated schools,
Right?
which we all know were notoriously underfunded and designed to limit opportunities for black students.
Yeah.
But even in that system, she managed to excel academically.
She did.
Do we have any insights into what that experience was like for her?
Well, sources describe her as a voracious reader, even at a young age. Apparently, she spent a lot of time at the library, soaking up knowledge and escaping, in a way, the realities around her.
Oh, well.
It seems those early experiences, those stark inequalities she witnessed, really solidified her commitment to social justice.
Yeah, definitely sounds like a pressure cooker for an activist, right?
Definitely.
But how did her formal education shape her views? Because after high school, she went on to Brandeis University
Right.
and graduated magna cum laude.
Very impressive.
Then she even studied at the Sorbonne in France.
Yeah, and then it gets even more interesting.
Oh, really?
She pursued her doctorate at Humboldt University in Berlin, right in the heart of Cold War tensions.
Wow.
This is where she encountered the work of Herbert Marcuse,
Oh, yeah, Herbert Marcuse.
the influential Marxist philosopher.
Now, Marcuse was pretty complex, but I've heard he had a huge influence on her.
Oh, he did?
Can you break down some of his core ideas,
Mhm.
especially the concepts of socialism and communism, and how those might have resonated with Davis, given what she had already experienced?
Sure. So Marcuse was a key figure in what's called the Frankfurt School, a group of thinkers who combined Marxist ideas with social and cultural critique.
Okay.
He argued that capitalism was inherently oppressive and created what he called false needs that kept people distracted and complacent.
Right.
His theories about revolution and social change, particularly his emphasis on the role of marginalized groups, likely resonated with Davis's own observations about racial injustice in America.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But was this like a turning point toward radicalism, or was it just part of her intellectual journey? Because next she lands a prestigious position at UCLA, right back to the U.S.
Yes, in 1969, she was hired as an assistant professor of philosophy at UCLA, but this is where things get really heated.
Oh, because within a year she's fired, right?
Yeah.
And the reason her affiliation with the Communist Party USA.
Exactly. The UCLA regents accused her of using inflammatory language and inciting violence. They basically argued that her political beliefs made her unfit to teach.
Yeah, this caused a huge uproar,
Huge.
with some defending her right to free speech and academic freedom, while others saw her as a threat to the university's integrity. And remember, this is the peak of the Cold War.
Right.
Anti-communist sentiment was incredibly high.
Absolutely.
So a court actually forces UCLA to rehire her,
That's right.
which is a legal victory for Davis.
Yes,
But it also shows just how polarizing she'd become.
for sure.
But then in a move that some saw as purely vindictive, they fire her again as soon as her contract runs out.
Wow.
What does this whole back and forth tell us about the political climate at the time?
Well, it shows just how deep the fear of communism ran and how it infiltrated even academic institutions.
Yeah.
On the one hand, UCLA might have felt pressure to appease those who saw Davis as a dangerous radical.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it does raise questions about whether they were truly committed to the principles of academic freedom. Or whether those principles could be conveniently discarded when faced with a politically charged situation.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex situation, and it makes you wonder if this is when things really shifted
Yeah.
for Davis, pushing her further into the spotlight and into more controversial territory.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, let's talk about another major event that shaped her life, the Soledad Brothers case.
All right, let's delve into that. The Soledad Brothers were 3 black inmates accused of killing a white prison guard at Soledad Prison in California.
Oh, yeah.
And the case became a rallying cry for activists who saw it as an example of systemic racism and brutality within the prison system.
And Davis becomes deeply involved in their defense.
Yeah, she did.
Why was she so drawn to this particular case?
Well, remember, this is right after she's been fired from UCLA.
Right.
She's already been labeled a radical and a communist.
Right.
The Soledad Brothers case allows her to connect her intellectual ideas about revolution and oppression with a real-world fight for justice.
Oh, okay, so it was more than just a legal case for her. It was like this perfect storm of her personal beliefs and this really high-profile case.
Exactly. And she develops a close relationship with one of the inmates, George Jackson.
Yeah.
And that relationship would become central to one of the most controversial episodes in her life.
Oh.
The Marin County Courthouse incident.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about this one.
Yeah.
This is where things get really crazy.
Yes. In 1970, during a court appearance for the Soledad Brothers, George Jackson's younger brother Jonathan attempts to free the prisoners.
Oh.
He bursts into the courtroom with guns and takes hostages.
Oh, my gosh.
The situation quickly escalates into a shootout.
It's like something out of a movie.
It is, and the judge, Jonathan Jackson, and 2 other inmates are killed.
What a tragedy.
Yeah, it's a shocking and tragic event.
But what's even more shocking is that Davis is charged with kidnapping, conspiracy, and murder
I know, right?
because the guns used in the escape attempt were registered to her.
Right now, the prosecution argued that Davis was a knowing participant in the plot, that she had purchased the weapons specifically for the escape attempt.
But her defense team maintained that she had no prior knowledge of the plan and was being unfairly targeted because of her political beliefs and her association with George Jackson.
Exactly.
So what does the evidence actually suggest? Was she a willing participant or a victim of circumstance?
Well, that's where things get really murky.
Oh, really?
There is no clear consensus among historians. Some point to the fact that Davis was a vocal advocate for armed revolution at the time, suggesting that she might have been sympathetic to violent tactics.
Oh, okay. I see.
Others argue that the prosecution's case was weak and relied heavily on circumstantial evidence.
Okay.
They claim she was essentially scapegoated because of her radical reputation.
It's hard to know what to believe.
It is, and she becomes a fugitive, right?
Yeah.
She's placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list,
Wow.
making her one of the most high-profile fugitives in American history.
And this is where the Free Angela campaign really takes off.
Yes, people all over the world rally to her cause, seeing her as a symbol of resistance against an oppressive system. Intellectuals, activists, even celebrities speak out in her defense.
Wow.
And after 18 months in jail, she's finally acquitted of all charges by an all-white jury.
It's a remarkable turn of events,
It is.
but it really underscores how divisive a figure she had become. To some, she was a dangerous radical who got away with murder.
Right.
To others, she was a victim of political persecution, a modern-day Joan of Arc.
Exactly. And this trial really exposed the deep racial and political fault lines in American society.
Yeah.
It raised questions about the fairness of the criminal justice system, particularly for Black defendants and those with radical political views.
Right.
It also fueled the debate about the limits of free speech and the right to dissent.
So after this ordeal, you might expect her to step back from the spotlight, maybe try to rebuild her life away from all the controversy.
You would think, right.
But she doesn't. Instead, she dives even deeper into activism.
That's right. She continues to be a prominent voice in social justice movements, advocating for prison abolition, women's rights, and economic justice.
Wow, she's not slowing down at all.
Nope. She travels the world, speaks at rallies, writes books, and continues to challenge the status quo.
And she even runs for vice president on the Communist Party ticket twice in 1980 and 1984.
Yeah.
This really makes you wonder, was she genuinely committed to creating change through those avenues? Or was she more focused on promoting herself and the communist cause, even if it meant alienating a lot of potential allies?
It's a valid question. Some argue that her unwavering commitment to communism blinded her to other, perhaps more pragmatic approaches to social change.
Okay.
They say that she became too entrenched in ideology, too focused on dismantling the system rather than working within it to achieve incremental progress.
But others might say that she was simply a woman of unwavering principle, that she refused to compromise her beliefs even when it meant facing ridicule or marginalization.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of her story, one that further complicates the grifter or gifted question. In 1997, she came out as a lesbian.
Oh, wow. This was a bold move, especially at a time when LGBTQ plus rights were far from mainstream, even within progressive activist circles.
Right.
It's interesting because this revelation adds a whole new layer to her public persona.
Hmm.
On the one hand, it reinforces her image as someone who challenges norms and defies expectations.
Right.
But on the other hand, it makes you think about the personal sacrifices involved in living such a public, politically charged life.
Right. It raises questions about the pressure to conform even within movements that claim to embrace diversity and liberation.
Yeah.
And it also highlights the courage it takes to live authentically, even when it means facing backlash from your own community.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We-
We've seen Angela Davis as a brilliant scholar, a fiery activist, a controversial figure who captivated the world's attention. But as we approach the end of this deep dive, the question still remains, grifter or gifted?
Yeah, it feels like with Angela Davis, every answer just leads to more questions, right?
Wow.
She's been called everything from a dangerous radical to a feminist icon.
Right.
I mean, how do we even begin to reconcile those wildly different views?
Well, it's important to remember that perspectives change over time, you know?
Yeah.
Think about it. Initially, she was demonized by much of mainstream America, branded a public enemy.
Yeah.
Yet in recent years, she's been celebrated receiving prestigious awards and honorary degrees.
It's true. Her image has been on everything from T-shirts to murals. She's been the subject of documentaries, even inspired characters in movies and TV shows.
It's really amazing.
It's a pretty remarkable shift in public perception.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is how history can be rewritten, how perceptions of controversial figures can evolve so dramatically.
Right. It makes you wonder, what does this tell us about our own changing understanding of social justice?
Yeah.
Are we more receptive to radical ideas now than we were 50 years ago? Or have we simply romanticized her past, choosing to focus on the activism while overlooking the more troubling aspects of her ideology?
It's a tough question. Maybe it's a bit of both.
Maybe.
Maybe as a society, we're more willing to acknowledge the complexities of individuals, to accept that someone can be both flawed and inspiring at the same time.
Perhaps, but it also raises questions about what it means to be a hero or an icon. Do we hold these figures to a higher standard?
Yeah.
Or do we acknowledge that they are products of their time shaped by the social and political forces around them?
It's like we're always trying to fit people into neat little boxes, hero or villain, grifter or gifted, but real life is rarely that simple.
Right, especially when it comes to someone like Angela Davis, who defied categorization throughout her entire life.
Exactly, and that's perhaps the most important takeaway from this deep dive.
I think so.
Angela Davis's story challenges us to think critically about how we judge those who challenge the status quo. It reminds us that history is not a static narrative, but an ongoing conversation,
Right.
constantly being reshaped and reinterpreted as new generations grapple with its complexities.
Well said.
So after all this, where do you stand, grifter or gifted?
I know.
Or maybe something in between? As always, we encourage you to keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.